This is every NBA team's realistic chances at the title, and I'll be giving each squad a letter grade for how realistic their shot at the title actually is. So let's begin right down at the bottom, and it's here in the F tier where I have 3 teams: the Brooklyn Nets, Washington Wizards, and the Utah Jazz. Now, all 3 of these teams are still very deep into their rebuilds. They've got some intriguing young talent making their way through, and there are definitely signs of progress when you look closely. But when it comes to actually competing for the championship this season, these 3 teams are just simply not even close to being in that position just yet. Now, that certainly doesn't mean the future isn't bright, because each of them is laying down the foundation to one day be in that conversation. But for right now, they're just too far away to be considered serious threats for a title run. Now we move on to the next tier, the D tier. And here I have 5 teams: the Bulls, Hornets, Suns, Kings, and the Pelicans. Now, on the surface, these teams are certainly better than the ones we just talked about in the F tier. But by better, I really just mean that they're more competitive. And in a strange way, that's actually not a good thing. Charlotte at least does still have a young core that could break out and change their future. But for Chicago, New Orleans, Sacramento, and Phoenix, the truth is there really isn't much to be excited about. Those 4 teams are all stuck in the middle, which is honestly the worst place to be in the NBA. You're not good enough to be a real contender, but you're also not bad enough to bottom out and actually land the kind of draft picks that can change a franchise. And for me, that's what makes the D tier the worst possible spot. At least with the F tier, you know what these teams are trying to do. They're tanking, setting themselves up for the future. But with these teams, they're just confusing, lacking any kind of a direction, as it's very difficult to see what these teams are actually trying to do. Now, moving into the C tier, I have 3 teams: the Boston Celtics, Indiana Pacers, and the Portland Trail Blazers. For Boston and Indiana, they're here for the exact same reason. Their best player suffered an Achilles tear, and will now have to miss the entirety of this upcoming season. And surprisingly, Portland's here for a very similar reason as well, waiting on the return of Damian Lillard, who suffered the same injury, although their situation as a whole is a little different. Because even if Portland are fully healthy, that team just isn't realistically good enough to be a championship threat. For the Celtics, this really feels like a gap year. They had to tear down a massive part of their championship core, trading away Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis to Portland and Atlanta. And in return, they landed Anthony Simons and Georges Niang, who Niang isn't even on the team anymore. That's how quick the turnover has been in Boston this offseason. But they also signed Luka Garza and Josh Minott, both from Minnesota. The way I see it, Boston's plan is really clear: boost the value of these young guys to flip them into something much bigger when Jason Tatum returns. Or perhaps these guys could turn into a strong supporting cast, helping them to attack the 2026-2020 season head on. But in the meantime though, this year is going to tell us a lot about Jaylen Brown. He's actually going to be the legitimate first option for the first time in his career, as for years people have argued that he might actually be the better of the 2 J's. Well, now he has the chance to prove it. For Indiana, it's a bit more painful. They not only lose Halliburton to the Achilles injury, but they also failed to re-sign Miles Turner, who ended up leaving for their rival Milwaukee Bucks. And that one just really stinks, because unlike Boston, the Pacers were set up and ready to compete in the East for at least 3 to 4 more seasons. Boston's salary cap situation was a lot tighter, meaning even if Tatum didn't get hurt, they would have had to get off of Porzingis and Holiday anyway. But for the Pacers, this season feels like a complete and utter waste of time. Think about it. They just lost a Game 7 of the NBA Finals. Then their best player goes down and now has to basically sit out the entirety of next season with nothing to show for it. Indiana hasn't made any moves and really is just waiting for Halliburton to return. Really just throwing away this upcoming season, trying to make another run at it when they're all fully healthy. But the loss of Miles Turner is really going to make that pretty difficult, as it's just a heartbreaking situation for that franchise. And finally, we've got the Blazers, and their situation isn't nearly as devastating. They've built a pretty solid young group, and with the Damian Lillard homecoming, there's a sense of optimism optimism in Portland right now. But for me, this season has to be all about experimentation. Test out the young guys. Give them as many real minutes as humanly possible and figure out exactly what you've got in this roster. Because while that's certainly not going to be winning the West anytime soon, they do have a chance to build something sustainable for when Dame is fully healthy. Now, let's move on to the C+ tier. Still in that C range, but with a little bump. And here I have 4 teams. The Orlando Magic, Miami Heat, Philadelphia 76ers, and the Toronto Raptors. Starting off with Orlando, because I know this one feels a little low for some people. Last season, they finished right at 500, 41-41, and that was while dealing with a ton of injuries. So the general idea is, once they're healthier, they're automatically going to be winning more games. And while that logic sounds nice, I think there is a little more to it. They went out and traded for Desmond Bane to fix their three-point shooting, which they desperately needed, but I actually think his presence could create another problem. Another massive issue Orlando had last season was figuring out how to share the touches between Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. And now you've just traded for another high usage guy. Offensively, I think it could be very clunky. And then there's the defensive side of the floor. Orlando's identity was built on their strong defensive lineup, but they just traded away KCP, who was one of their better defenders, and replaced him with Bane, who isn't exactly known for defense. So it looks like they might take a small step back there as well. Plus, the Wagner-Banchero dynamic is still something to watch. When Paolo was out, Franz looked like a star, averaging 26 points per game without Banchero. But when Paolo Banchero returned, those numbers dipped significantly. Wagner's skill set just doesn't translate well off ball, especially with his three-point shot still being inconsistent. So while I do think Orlando will improve record-wise, I just don't see it being as drastic as a leap as some are expecting. I think I've got them winning roughly 44 games this year, but they absolutely have a chance to prove me wrong once the season starts. But for right now, I do have them in the C+ tier. And to make it clear, I think they are the top of this group. Coming up next, I've got the Miami Heat. They added Norman Powell over the offseason, which is fine, but this is still a team that feels like the same old formula, built around Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo. And honestly, this is a version of the Heat that for me has a clear ceiling. They're going to be competitive, sure, but at the best, I think they're just going to be a slightly above average team that just doesn't have enough juice to push beyond that. Then we have the 76ers, and honestly, I think they might be the hardest team to grade next season. Their range of outcomes is massive. Worst case scenario, they could get even worse than last year, but best case scenario, if Joel Embiid somehow comes back and looks good, then they could make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. But realistically, the injuries just continue to pile up, and the chatter around Embiid's career doesn't sound encouraging. It's a really sad situation, because it feels like we've probably seen the last of his MVP level dominance. On the other side of things though, Philadelphia does have a really promising young core with Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain, and the 3rd overall pick, VJ Edgecombe. That's a good collection of guys for the future. But the big question for the present is Paul George. He's still on the roster, but he's already sustained another injury and is doubtful to be available for the start of training camp. And if he ends up blocking minutes for Edgecombe, it could really slow down his development. So ranking Philadelphia is such a tough call. Embiid and Paul George could come back and look good, or we get a repeat to last season. They could legitimately finish anywhere, but I think I'm sticking with them being a middle of the road team. Here at C+, just feels about right. Now let's look at the Toronto Raptors, and I actually think this group is going to be more competitive than they were last year. The first reason why I think this is pretty simple: the addition of Brandon Ingram, who has been an all-star level player for really his entire career so far, as long as he stays healthy, which is the big if. And then that leads into the second reason, and that's health again. Last season, Toronto just couldn't keep their main guys on the floor together for any real amount of time, and it did hold them back. I think if they stay healthy, we could see some development from Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, and Brandon Ingram as a trio, and I think they could do some damage in a weakened Eastern Conference. But I also think the fit could be a little clunky, so we just have to wait and see. Now we move on to the B tier, which is absolutely loaded with teams. So to kick it off, I have 5 teams sitting in the B- range. The Bucks, Pistons, Hawks, Spurs, and Grizzlies. Starting off with Milwaukee, I really think they are being slept on. From the outside looking in, sure, their roster feels a bit thinner, but what's really being overlooked is just how good that front court is going to be with Miles Turner next to Giannis. On both ends of the floor, that's a scary duo. And what's more interesting about this team is how quickly they're shifting in their identity. Just a couple of seasons ago, Milwaukee was one of the oldest teams in the NBA, but now they've gotten far younger, and they've got some pieces that could quietly develop into real contributors. If those guys can take a step this season, then I think the Bucks could be in a much better situation than people think. Of course, that's not guaranteed, which is why I have them here at a B-. But with Giannis still putting up MVP level numbers, Milwaukee are always going to be a dangerous team once the playoffs begin. Now to Detroit, and this is one of the craziest stories from the whole of last season. The Pistons came completely out of left field and tripled their win total from the previous year. Literally the only team in NBA history to ever pull that off. Cade Cunningham took the superstar leap and put himself in the conversation as a top 10 player in basketball. And the way Detroit closed out last season was seriously impressive. If they can carry that kind of momentum into this year, pushing 50 wins isn't out of the question. Add to that the return of Jaden Ivey, who averaged over 17 points per game, and the backcourt between he and Cunningham could be one of the very best in basketball. Defensively, the team's loaded as well, with guys like Asua Thompson, Isaiah Stewart, and Jalen Duren forming a strong defensive backbone. I expect them to be really tough on that end, while being good enough offensively to win a ton of games in the East. Next up, I've got the Atlanta Hawks. They had one of the more aggressive off seasons of any team, and I think it is going to pay off. Bringing in Kristaps Porzingis gives Trae Young the best pick and roll or pick and pop partner he's had for his entire career. KP isn't just a floor spacing big man, he is a legit shooter from way out, and that's going to completely open up the floor in a massive way. Then you look at Dyson Daniels, who was last season's most improved player and had a real case for the defensive player of the year as well, and all of that makes him the perfect backcourt partner for Trae, balancing out Trae's offense with Dyson's elite defense. The return of Jalen Johnson will also be a big boost, while adding guys like Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Luke Kennard gives them reliable contributors coming off the bench, something they really didn't have last year. All in all, this Hawks team looks far better on paper, but the key is going to be health. KP and Johnson need to stay on the floor, and Trae Young has to rediscover his scoring efficiency to go along with his amazing playmaking. If all of that clicks, I think Atlanta could make a run similar to what Indiana just did. But until we actually see it, I've got them in the B- range. Now, let's take a look at the San Antonio Spurs, one of the most exciting young teams in the NBA right now. In my opinion, they have the brightest future in the NBA right now, but I just don't think their time is just yet. The best case scenario is that Wemby plays like a top 3 candidate for MVP, and they sneak into that 5 or 6 seed range in a brutal Western Conference. But realistically, I just don't think they're ready to push much further than that. This season is going to be about figuring out whether the Spurs are ready to start competing now, or if they still need a year or two to let their talent fully develop. The Wemby-De'Aaron Fox pairing has potential to win a game on any night, but chemistry does take time, and those younger role players still need to prove that they can be consistent. Their time is coming, but I just don't think it's going to be next season. But make no mistake, San Antonio are still good enough to be a B- team. Then finally, I have the Memphis Grizzlies. Probably the least exciting out of these 5, and also probably the worst. They made a splash this off-season, trading away Desmond Bane in return for 4 first-round picks. And because of that, I think their name's going to pop up in rumors as we approach the trade deadline. I believe Memphis could absolutely go out and use those picks to trade for another star. But the real question with Memphis next season is far bigger than that. Do they actually believe in Ja Morant and the Jaren Jackson Jr. core? Or has it ran its course? Health has been a real issue with that tandem, as we saw them go as high as the 2 seed in the West, while also finishing as the 8 seed like they did last season. But no matter the seeding, Memphis have been constantly eliminated early in the playoffs. So I think this season has to be the year where Memphis figures out exactly whether or not they're good enough to compete in the West. And if not, I'd expect a retool to be happening over the offseason. Now, let's move on to the B tier. And here, I have 3 teams sitting at a B flat, the Warriors, Lakers, and Mavericks, and then one team a step above at B+, the Clippers. Starting off with Golden State, even though their off-season has basically been on pause since it started because of the Jonathan Kuminga contract situation, I still think they do belong here. Sure, they probably missed out on some good additions, but the difference maker has already arrived, Jimmy Butler. Before Jimmy showed up, Golden State were hanging on with a 113.9 offensive rating, a bottom 15 free throw rate, and just a 0.7 net rating. Absolutely a mediocre team. But with him, those numbers skyrocketed up to a plus 9.6 net rating, in the 99th percentile in free throw rate, and an offense clicking at 117.8 points per 100. Numbers of a legitimate championship threat. And then when Jimmy Butler and Steph shared the floor, things got even scarier offensively, all the way up to 120.9 points per 100. Then to simple it down even more, Golden State has a 23-7 all-time record with Jimmy Butler. And that isn't a fluke, because he patched every hole the team had before his arrival. From perimeter defense to half-court creation, he did it all without stepping on Steph's toes, actually making Curry better. Very quickly, it became one of the cleanest duos in the league. And even if this team is older and has some regular season hurdles, do you really want to come up against Steph and Jimmy healthy in a 7-game series? Absolutely not. Now the Lakers. On paper, LeBron and Luka together still feels like a 2K fantasy trade, but it's actually happened, and that alone keeps them firmly in the B tier. Offensively, they'll be fine with Luka, LeBron, Rui, and Austin Reeves, but the concerns come on the other end. Who exactly is their defensive stopper here? Ayton hasn't proven he can be that guy, and Marcus Smart, the guy they brought in to be that defensive guy, really hasn't been able to stay healthy in years. Still, Luka is gearing up for a revenge season, reportedly getting into the best shape of his life, which is just crazy because even an out-of-shape Luka was still better than 99% of the NBA last season, averaging 28 points a night on 53% effective field goal shooting in the purple and gold. Pair that with LeBron heading into year 23, and this team is far from bad, but defensively, they do have real question marks that need to be answered. Then we have the Dallas Mavericks. On paper, they do look like a contender, but the gap between their ceiling and floor is so wide. If Kyrie comes back healthy and Anthony Davis is healthy as well, then they could easily push up into the A tier. But if Kyrie doesn't come back or isn't quite himself, along with Anthony Davis struggling with injuries, then this team could really fall as low as C. But for right now, the B tier feels about right. Cooper Flagg is going to be the focal point early, with Dallas planning to throw him into as many uncomfortable spots as possible early in the season. And the main spot they want to try him out in is as the team's point guard, as head coach Jason Kidd did this with Giannis back in Milwaukee and hopes to have similar results here with Cooper Flagg. Defensively, with Anthony Davis at the 4 alongside Lively and Gafford at the 5, this team could be elite. But offensively, their lack of three-point shooting is going to be a major issue. In the 9 games Anthony Davis played in Dallas last year, they averaged just 10.9 threes made a game. That's worse than the league's worst three-point shooting team, the Orlando Magic. That has to improve next year. The good news is that Kyrie should be back later in the season, and if he can stabilize things quickly, Dallas could make a real run. And finally, I have the Clippers in at a B+. No team was busier this offseason than the Clippers. They retained James Harden, added Brook Lopez, traded for John Collins, signed Chris Paul, and signed Bradley Beal for just $11 million after his Suns buyout, which is insane value. Beal just never really fit in with the Suns, averaging 17 a game on 56% true shooting. But next to James Harden, he's going to get more touches and in rhythm. The addition of John Collins gives them an athletic 4, and Zubac quietly had a career year. 16.8 points, 12.6 rebounds, 1.6 blocks, and 6th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. Then, adding Brook Lopez gives them 48 minutes of solid center play, fixing one of their biggest weaknesses last year. Kawhi still looks like the guy when he's healthy, averaging 25 points a game on 60% true shooting in that first round series against the Nuggets. And for James Harden, he remains steady with 22.8 points a game, along with 5.8 rebounds and 8.7 assists on 50% effective field goal shooting. The question though with the Clippers is health. They're an old team that simply cannot afford to grind late in the regular season. So banking wins early in the year is going to be absolutely crucial. But if they're healthy, this roster has tremendous upside, and that's why they sneak above the rest at a B+. Now we're getting into the cream of the crop, the A tier, and these are the 6 teams that I see as true title contenders with a very real chance to go all the way. Starting off at the A- range, I've got the New York Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Let's begin with the Knicks, who I think are simply going to be better next year. Part of that is just chemistry and continuity after trading for Karl Anthony Towns in training camp of last season. But also, the roster moves they made will also take them up another level. Adding Gershon Yabusele from Philly and Jordan Clarkson from Utah addresses a glaring weakness from last season, a lack of bench depth. Now yes, Knicks fans, I can already hear you in the comments saying that you did have a bench, but Tibbs just wasn't using it. And while that is a fair assessment, the reality is the bench wasn't actually that good anyway. But this season, it's a completely different story. A second unit featuring Miles McBride, Clarkson, Yabusele, and Josh Hart, who I think should be coming off the bench to run the ball and push the pace in those bench configurations, is overall a much stronger group to support the loaded starting 5 of Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Karl Anthony Towns, and likely Mitchell Robinson. Then when you factor in the new system that Mike Brown wants to implement, which sees the Knicks leaning into their versatility, upping the pace, and overall sharing the offensive load a bit more, then that could be exactly what New York needs. Too often last year, they fell into the Brunson-centric attack, and as good as he is, it did make them very predictable. So, spreading the offense around to Bridges, OG, and Towns makes them far more dangerous, because now the defense can't just lock onto one guy. Defensively, the Knicks were a problem in the playoffs after struggling in the regular season, and if they can carry that elite defense from day one, you're looking at a team that could really push for 60 wins in the East. Brunson should once again finish top 10 in MVP voting, and with Karl Anthony Towns alongside of him, New York has a foundation that's really only getting stronger. Then we have Minnesota, the other A- team. This group isn't drastically different from last season, but the biggest change is the loss of Nickeil Alexander-Walker and how they try and replace his production. Alexander-Walker gave them great perimeter defense, some ball handling, and solid shooting, all at a high level to come off the bench, so filling that role won't be an easy feat. But I do really like what we saw from Terrence Shannon Jr., especially in the conference finals against the Thunder last postseason. So much so that I think he can carve out a consistent off-the-bench role alongside of Jalen Clark and Rob Dillingham. The rest of the roster though is still intact, but the key is Anthony Edwards. His next step has to come as a playmaker. Scoring has never been the issue, but in that Thunder series, his decision-making was exposed. Defenses sped him up, he couldn't process quick enough, and his production then fell off. If he makes strides as a steady, smart playmaker, he could unlock a new level for the Wolves offense. Because let's be honest, defensively, I think they're already championship caliber, with Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels holding down the fort. The title hopes really rest on Edwards becoming a complete offensive superstar, as he needs to take that playmaking leap. Now, let's move into the A tier proper, and here I have the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Houston Rockets. For Cleveland, I have them ranked as the highest Eastern Conference team, even above New York, because I don't think last year's second round exit was about choking. It was certainly more to do with injuries, as Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, and DeAndre Hunter were all banged up. A fully healthy Cavs team should absolutely expect to be in the conference finals this season. Donovan Mitchell is playing at an MVP level, but the guy that I think can take them to the next stage is Evan Mobley. He already won the Defensive Player of the Year last season, while also averaging 18.5 points per game. And I think that could jump up to about 23 points per game this season, which would be massive. If that happens, he becomes their best player, and some people already think he is. Then you've got Darius Garland, who finally had a healthy season and was able to make the All-Star team, and at times he had stretches where he was Cleveland's best player. And that's the beauty of this Cavs team. They have multiple guys who can all look like their number one option for a stretch of the season. Offensively, they were the best team in the league, and defensively, they still hovered around the top 10, though it did slip off late in the season. Next year, they need to prioritize being a top 5 defensive team, especially if they're going to win a championship. Then there's Houston. With Kevin Durant now in the mix, this team is now fully ready to compete. Last year, they were already the 2 seed in the West with 52 wins, and that came without a true go-to scorer. KD instantly fixes that. Their defense was elite and carried them to many close games, but they lacked that closer. Despite that, Houston still won 59% of their clutch games, which is impressive. But now, give those late possessions to Durant, and that just changes everything. This alone could push them to 60 this season. And then when you add in the leap I expect from Amen Thompson, plus the steady pieces like Van Fleet, Şengün, Eason, Finney-Smith, Steven Adams, and Clint Capella, and they truly have all the pieces needed to go all the way. Now, finally, in the A+ tier, the 2 absolute best teams coming into next season are the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Denver Nuggets. The Thunder just pulled off one of the most impressive championship runs we've seen in modern history, and the crazy part is, I think they're going to be even better this season. They managed to keep their entire championship core intact, which is incredibly rare in today's NBA, and that chemistry alone makes them better. Then, the big X factor is going to be Chet Holmgren. He battled injuries last season, fracturing his hip and having to miss a massive chunk of the regular season. And then when he came back, his mobility just was not the same. But if he's able to fully recover, getting back to his mobile best, then we could be in store for a massive offensive leap out of Holmgren. And when that happens, OKC's ceiling rises again. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander should be a top 3 MVP candidate again, and with all of that going in the Thunder's favor, I believe they have a very real chance to win 70 games. And now we've got the Denver Nuggets also at A+. The Nuggets successfully extended their title window around Nikola Jokic and fixed their biggest issue from last season, the bench unit. That unit posted a horrendous -31 net rating in the playoffs, and that proved to be their undoing. But now, with Jonas Valanciunas, Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Peyton Watson being their bench group, they've now got real stability. Combine that with the growth of the role players like Aaron Gordon and Christian Brown, 2 guys who improved significantly as 3-point shooters, and Denver is more complete than ever. They also swapped Michael Porter Jr., who was very inconsistent, especially in the playoffs last season, for the more steady Cam Johnson. And I believe that move is really underrated as well. Don't expect Denver to be chasing the 1 seed in the regular season. They really don't do that anymore. But they've proven time and time again that they can flip the switch when it really matters, especially when we talk about the defensive side of the floor. As long as Jokic is at the helm and the starters dominate dominate like they always do, and they now have a bench unit who's not going to bleed points, Denver is absolutely going to be right there with Oklahoma City as the two best teams in the NBA next season, especially once the playoffs roll around. And if you want to know which players are the most likely to carry their teams in that race, then make sure you check out the 10 most likely MVP winners in the 2026 NBA season breakdown video right now.